its nose at climate efforts by nations around the world. Texas Congressman Moran pressing Kerry on China and pressure on human rights versus the climate change. This moments ago. Let's watch.
What are you doing to force China to reduce its CO2 emissions?
Well, I'm going there to start with, but I'm not sure that that presence alone is enough to force them. But we're certainly,
it's a reasonable question. I mean, you've been asked to do this. I didn't ask you to do it. The president asked you to go abroad and to have this conversation with China. And so I want to know, what are we going to do to twist their arm?
It's the use of the word force. I think that it's important to have a dialogue about how you can both reach agreement to do
replace the word force with influence. What are you going to do to influence China to reduce its CO2 emissions?
Well, we've had very successful rounds of meetings with them and have moved significantly. China, let me give you an idea of what China is doing now in response to some of the pressure that I think has been evident.
I want to get real specific about actions you're going to ask them to do. What actions are you going to go to the table?
Well, we're looking at the CBAM. I told you. We're looking very closely at the CBAM, as is Europe and other countries. We're looking at other ways to be able to try. But our preference is to have China say, yeah, that makes sense.
But China hasn't, because in the past decade, as you know, we've reduced emissions here in the United States, but in the same time frame, China's emissions have increased. The pollution that's coming out of China far exceeds.
That's exactly why we're working at what we're doing.
And you said yourself, quote, earlier, this is a global, universal issue, and we don't want it to become captive to other issues. But I'm curious, when you say that, if you're ignoring these other issues, like my colleague brought up here, human rights issues, would you agree that human rights issues are also global, universal issues?
Absolutely.
But you want to keep them separate when you're talking to China, is what you said earlier. Is that true?
What I said is, well, no, we don't keep them separate in terms of our priorities.
No, that's exactly
I go
what you
there.
said. You said President Xi and President Biden agreed at the outset to separate out the climate issue.
Correct.
So it wouldn't get caught up in these other issues.
Correct.
So were you correct?
That doesn't mean you don't talk about them,
well,
but it means that they're not going to become showstoppers. So
okay, and I presume that you're...
You know what we're trying to do? We're trying to make sure that you don't have to worry that John Kerry is going to give away some right on human rights in order to get what he's trying to get.
So I get that, and I presume
I
presume that you're going to have conferences with your counterparts that are having those discussions on those other issues, and that President Biden has said to you and those others which one is more priority over the other. So my question would be: is human rights the bigger issue? Is the slave labor coming out of the Uyghur people
this administration
or
is
it
capable of keeping
change?
all its priorities on the table and of treating all of them simultaneously. But we don't have to wrap them up so one becomes hostage to the other, or you don't make progress.
You plan to hold China accountable if they do not follow through with the activities that you're going to suggest and to reduce their emissions, because they're able to get ahead of our economy by producing many more emissions and having less regulatory action on their businesses than we are here in the United States.
And we don't want that to happen. That is precisely
then how are you going to hold them accountable?
Because that's exactly why President Biden has asked us to examine the countervailing
I have never seen an examination hold anybody accountable. We need action to hold them accountable.
Well, that's exactly what's happening. And you've got several senators. You have some in the House.
We don't legislate China, but we need to hold them accountable.
No, but you can legislate a CBAM.
Congressman Moran just went after John Kerry, and John Kerry didn't have any answers for how they're going to hold China accountable, even on the one thing that they've chosen over human rights, apparently, climate change. He says they can do it all simultaneously. If only I had a penny for every Democrat that says they can walk and chew gum at the same time. I would be very wealthy, even in pennies. We'll continue to monitor this hearing held by a House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee. We'll bring you more news out of it as it's made. Wanted to show you that. New Yorkers are furious and frightened because of their